Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining the Pennsylvania Game Commission for our Learn to Hunt Deer Archery program. My name is Courtney, and I will be managing the program tonight. Tonight's program is about an hour in length, and it will be followed by a short question and answer session. Before we get started, I want to make sure everyone can hear us. Please let us know that you can hear us by typing into the Questions tab found on the right-hand side of your screen. You can send us questions at any point in time during the program by typing into the Questions tab. We have a lot of people attending tonight, so we may not be able to get to everyone's questions. If we don't get your question, don't worry. We'll be sending a follow-up email with answers to any missed questions. We'll also provide you with a link to a recording of tonight's program and additional resources. Okay, just looking through here. It looks like everybody can hear us, so that's great. Tonight's program will be given by Steve Smith. He is our Information and Education Bureau Director. Okay, and I'm going to switch it over and we're going to get started.
Good evening and welcome to the next installment of our Learn to Hunt program. Tonight we are going to be talking about archery hunting and covering the basics that you'll need to know in order to get started and hopefully become successful this fall. Now, archery hunting has exploded in popularity here in Pennsylvania over the past few years, and there are a lot of reasons for that. First, we have a really good, healthy deer herd, deer population. So there's a good chance that you'll at least have the opportunity to harvest a deer during the season. Second, the season is longer than ever before. It goes well into the deer mating season or the rut when the deer are most active. And third, for safety reasons. There are areas where it's more appropriate to use archery equipment for hunting deer than a rifle, like in the suburbs and some of the urban areas where deer hunting is allowed. Fourth, I think, is because of the time of year. Archery hunters usually don't have to deal with the snow, sleet, freezing temperatures, all the weather conditions that occur during the firearm deer season. Instead, archery hunting is a chance to be outside when the temperatures are fairly mild, the leaves are changing, and it's really some of the best times to be in the woods. But for those who are new to archery hunting, it can be intimidating getting started due to all that's involved. And our goal for tonight is to alleviate some of those concerns that you might have and give you the tools that you'll need to get started and, like I said, hopefully be successful this fall as well. There are two type of bows that I'm going to talk about when I mention archery hunting. The first is the compound. And I'm sure most are familiar with how a compound bow works. It requires the shooter to physically draw the string back and release an arrow. And because of the tension involved once the string is drawn back, the goal is to release that arrow within a short period of time. Because no matter how strong the shooter is, trying to hold back a compound bow for any amount of time is very demanding and will affect the accuracy of the shot. The other type of bow that archery hunters can use is a crossbow. And unlike a compound bow, a crossbow can be drawn back and ready to fire well before the shot takes place, which is a big advantage of a crossbow over a compound. The crossbow is drawn back, and that can be done either by hand or with the use of a cocking device such as a rope cocker or through a mechanical crank. And some of the newer crossbows have a crank that attaches to the stock and makes it easier to pull that rope back, the string back, and have the crossbow in position to fire. Once it's loaded, meaning the string is pulled back and an arrow is placed on the rail, a crossbow can remain in that position for an extended period of time, up to several hours, before it's fired. And an individual fires a crossbow just like they would a shotgun or a rifle. It's fired by pulling the trigger, which releases the string and fires the arrow. No matter what type of bow that you use, crossbow or a compound, they both release arrows. On the left are arrows from a compound, and on the right are arrows from a crossbow. And you'll notice that the compound arrows are much longer than those used by a crossbow. And that is because the arrows must be specifically designed to fit the dimensions of the person shooting the bow. And we call that their draw length. For compounds, both the bow itself and the arrows have to be specifically matched to the shooter's draw length. For crossbows, there isn't that need to determine the draw length, but the arrow length is determined by the make and the model of the crossbow that you are shooting. Most crossbows use arrows that are either 20 inches or 22 inches in length. It's important that you check your specific bow to see what length of arrows it is built for. And crossbows and compounds both also use arrow points. These are what attach at the end of the arrow and are the first part to make contact with the target itself. So starting at the bottom left of this picture are field tips. These are blunt and they're not designed to allow the arrow to penetrate deep into the target. Rather, for hunting situations, we use what are called broadheads. And these come in two types. On the bottom right is a fixed blade broadhead. It's made usually of metal and it stays the same the entire time. Its form stays the same. But then on the top, we have mechanical broadheads. These are designed to fly just like a field tip in that they have a small profile when they are released. But once they hit the target and make contact, they open up. They increase the size, the diameter of the broadhead itself. Now, there are pros and cons for each type of broadhead. Some hunters prefer the mechanical because they are quieter and they fly very similar to a field point. Some prefer the fixed blade because there's no possibility of air, such as one of the blades not opening up when it hits and makes impact with the target. Either type can and will absolutely kill a deer in Pennsylvania. It's really a matter of personal preference based on what you find shoots best from your bow. Something to keep in mind when buying arrows and arrow points is you have to be cognizant of the cumulative weight of the arrow with the point attached. And this is because every bow has a minimum arrow weight requirement. And if you were to shoot a bow that has an arrow that's below the minimum weight, it could damage the bow. So when you're buying points, you want to know what weight they are. And that is measured in grains. As you can see here, we have broadheads starting left to right that weigh 100 grains, then 125 grains, all the way up to 150 grains. And just as the arrow point is measured in grains, so also the arrow itself is measured in grains. And here are some arrows that are used for a crossbow. And you can see they're labeled as weighing 400 grains. So if I wanted to use these arrows out of a crossbow, and the minimum arrow weight on that crossbow for arrows is 525 grains, when I purchase points, either field tips to practice or broadheads to hunt, I need to make sure that the points weigh 125 grains so that the cumulative weight gets me to 525, which is the minimum. Anything less than that, if I were to buy 100 grain points, that would cause damage to the limbs of the crossbow and potentially damage the individual shooting it as well. And it's easy to find the minimum weight for the particular bow that you're using. Just check the manufacturer's website for that information. Now let's talk about the different type of stands that hunters use, different type of ways hunters use to conceal themselves when they're archery hunting. And most hunters do use some method of concealing themselves. Given that archery hunting requires getting within close range of the deer and then releasing an arrow, there's a lot of movement involved with that. So the more that you can stay hidden, conceal your movement, the better your chances are of being successful. And there's several different ways to stay hidden. And with each one, it has particular pros and cons. So the first is a ladder stand. These are a popular choice for a lot of hunters. The top section of the stand, as well as the middle section, attaches to the tree by straps that go around the tree. Once that's in place, it's very convenient for a hunter to be able to go up and down the stand in a matter of a minute or two. Ladder stands, though, are heavy and they often require several people to safely set one up. Another disadvantage is that it's hard to move them throughout the season, given the work involved. So once it's set up, a hunter might be limited to that location unless he can find the time and the help to move it. A hang-on stand is a similar concept to a ladder stand, but it's designed for one individual only. And the steps that go up to the stand aren't attached to the stand itself, rather they come in segments, each segment of which has to be attached to the tree by a strap. And once it's set up, a hang-on stand, though, is very similar to a ladder in that it's easy to get up and down, and it doesn't take as much time and effort to change locations as one would in a ladder stand. And then there are climbing tree stands, the climber, and this is for those who prefer to be very mobile. A climbing tree stand consists of two parts, each that wrap around the base of the tree, and they're used to move the individual up and down. So the way it works is a hunter attaches both portions of the stand around the tree, standing in the bottom platform, and then takes that first half and moves it above his waist, and then connects his feet to the bottom platform and pulls that bottom platform up toward his torso, and then repeats that movement until they reach the desired height in the tree itself. So like this individual here, he's incrementally moving up the tree, one section at a time. And when he's done hunting, he'll come down the tree the same way. Every time it's in increments, each section at a time, moving down. And as you can see, these type of stands are not nearly as easy to use as a ladder stand or a hang-on stand. But the real advantage is that a hunter can pick a new location every time they go out. So it's for hunters who prefer to be mobile, want to hunt lots of different areas. A climbing tree stand is perfect for them. No matter what tree stand you use, there are a few safety precautions that should always be followed. First, use a draw rope to haul your equipment up and down the tree. Never try to climb into a tree stand with something on your back or something in your hands. And in particular, if you're hunting with a crossbow, cock the crossbow at the base of the tree, like we talked about, using either a rope or a crank. Cock the crossbow, pull that string back, but don't load it with an arrow. Just leave it with the string pulled back and the safety on, and then attach the draw rope to the stock of the crossbow away from the trigger and draw the crossbow up with it pointed toward the ground. This way, if something were to snag onto the crossbow, for some reason the trigger were to be pulled, all of the energy of the crossbow is going away from you and going toward the ground. So always use a draw rope to bring anything up and down a tree, but remember the particular rules for a crossbow. A little different than any other piece of equipment in that you want to make sure nothing's attached anywhere near the trigger and that it's pointed away from you. And the second universal principle that applies whenever you're hunting from any type of elevated platform is it is critically important that you wear a harness. We recommend a full body harness that goes around the chest and the legs. That way, should you fall, you wouldn't be just suspended by one particular section, which would be difficult to breathe and try to maneuver back into the stand. A full body harness provides the most protection. And we recommend that you wear that harness and be connected to the tree at all times whenever your feet are off the ground. Don't wait until you get set up into a tree stand to put on your harness. I really can't think of anything worse than to fall and be injured and know that there was a harness in your backpack where it didn't provide any help whatsoever. So here's an individual using a climber to go up a tree, and you can see from the strap that's above his shoulder there that he's wearing his harness and he's attached to the tree as he's climbing. This is the safest way to move up and down a tree. If you're using a ladder stand or a hang-on stand, you can purchase what's called a lifeline rope, and that attaches to your harness and the tree, and it moves up or down the tree with you as you climb or descend. And for more information on this particular topic, we're going to include a link to a video that goes into a little more depth on tree stand safety and what you can do to make sure you're safe this year when bow hunting. But you don't have to use a tree stand. A lot of archery hunters do, but others prefer to stay on the ground. And if you're going to hunt from the ground, it's critical that you blend into your surroundings. And probably the best way to do that would be through using a ground blind. A ground blind is really beneficial for areas where there's no suitable trees for climbing, for putting a tree stand, or if you'll be hunting with someone else and that individual might be a younger hunter or someone who's not comfortable being in an elevated stand. In those kind of situations, a blind is a great choice. The best way to use a blind is as this individual did here. The blind isn't set out in the open, but instead it's back into the vegetation. So it's took advantage of the type of brush that it's around it and blended back into that brush. The more that you can set a blind this way so that it appears natural, the more likely you are to have a deer come into range. A word about the law before I go any further. So if you're using a ground blind or a tree stand and you are hunting either game lands or property within the Game Commission's public access program, then the stand or the blind can only be set up 2 weeks before the season begins, and it needs to be removed 2 weeks after the season closes. In addition, it must be marked with an identification tag, and that tag should have either the owner's name and home address or their customer identification number that is available on their license, or a number that they received from the Game Commission specifically for this purpose. And finally, putting out a blind or a tree stand ahead of time doesn't reserve that spot. Other hunters can still hunt in that area, particularly if they are the first to arrive. So keep in mind that in any setting, any situation, there's still that need to exercise good hunting ethics and share the woods with other hunters. So now that you have your bow, you've decided if you're going to use a tree stand or a ground blind. The next question, and really the million-dollar question for archery hunting, is where to hunt, where to set up. So when deciding where to hunt, keep in mind 3 things that deer need to survive. They always must have food, cover, and water. Now, water isn't a problem in Pennsylvania. We are blessed to live in an area that has plenty of lakes, ponds, streams, creeks, rivers, so water really isn't an issue. If you are going to find an area to hunt, chances are there's water nearby. But the other 2, food and cover, those are the critical ones. You're simply not going to find deer in an area that doesn't have food and cover. So use that information to your advantage. First, let's talk about cover. And this refers to habitat types that give deer the best chance to be undetected. You likely don't see deer in wide open areas during daylight hours. Deer just don't feel safe in that kind of environment. So most of the time, deer are going to be moving back and forth between areas that look like this one picture. This is an area with thick young vegetation. A deer could bed down in this type of cover without worrying about being seen. And this particular spot is on a game lands, and the Game Commission cut this area a few years back for its mature timber, the big trees. And what that did is it created this kind of young cover for deer. Deer love this thick habitat. They can hide in there very easily. Now, for us hunters, walking through there would be a nightmare. We're going to do everything we can to avoid an area like this, but deer love it. This is the kind of cover that they really thrive in. So we found an area that has some cover where deer will feel secure. Next, it's time to find the food. And in archery season, the first thing that I'm going to look for are mass crops. These are the nuts that are falling from trees in the fall. And these tend to be a deer's primary food source, particularly when the mass consists of acorns, like what we have pictured here. Deer love acorns. And throughout the fall, it's not uncommon to see deer with their heads down in the leaves. And what they're doing is they're eating those nuts that have fallen, because they're a great source of fat that the deer will rely upon to make it through the winter. But deer don't just rely on mass crops. They will also frequent agriculture areas, as any farmer can attest to. So if you have crops in your areas, like cornfields, pay attention to them as well. And soybean fields, particularly in the early fall when the soybeans fields are still green. Those kind of areas draw in deer like a magnet, as evidenced by this picture. Also, be on the lookout for other sources of food like fruit trees. An old orchard will absolutely bring deer in. Deer are really opportunists. They will eat anything that is available in the fall as they get ready for the winter. I can also add to this list peaches. I have a peach tree, and to my surprise this summer, the deer found the peaches that had rotted and fallen and were eating them every night. So any type of fruit tree in the area is something that you're going to be cognizant of as a potential spot for deer. So back to the question of where to set up, where to hunt. So you found an area that has food and has cover. There's a good chance that deer are in that area if you have those two elements. So the question becomes, how do I narrow that down? Where exactly might they be traveling? And what you're going to look for is particular sign. First is buck rubs. A buck rub is created when a buck or a male deer rubs its antlers on saplings, brush, or small trees. Throughout this process, the bark of that tree will be peeled away and it'll expose the fresh wood underneath. And there's lots of theories and purposes as to why a buck will create a rub. One is that they're getting that velvet off their antlers that covers them in the summer, and that they're preparing for a competition that they'll need once mating season begins. Another purpose for rubs is to communicate with other deer that they are in the area and they're marking their territory. Whatever the reason for a hunter, when a buck rubs a tree, it confirms that there are deer in the area and you're in a spot where that buck travels. So here's a picture of what a finished rub looks like. You can see, as I said, that bark is peeled away, making them noticeable. This is a definite sign to other deer and to you as the hunter that there are deer nearby in the area. Another thing to look for once you found food and cover, and hopefully some buck rubs as well, are scrapes. Scrapes are one of the best ways that deer communicate with each other through leaving scent behind. And a scrape has two parts. The first is a licking branch. And as the buck identifies an area where he wants to create a scrape, it'll rub its forehead on the licking branch to deposit the scent. And then the second part of the scrape is underneath the licking branch. This is where the buck paws the ground with its hooves and exposes a bare patch of dirt. The buck will then urinate in that bare patch of dirt, and the urine will pass over what are called tarsal glands located on the inside of that buck's hind leg. And as a doe approaches mating season, she's also going to urinate in the scrape as a way to signal to any buck in the area that she is ready to mate. So you can imagine the importance of scrapes as a communication tool for deer as they head into mating season. Once you find a scrape, especially a fresh one, you can be sure that there's deer in the area and you found a good place to hunt. So now that we've found an area that has food and cover, we've located rubs and scrapes, so we've confirmed deer are in the area, there's a couple of other things to keep in mind before we go out and hang a stand or put up a blind. The first is that deer are what we call edge animals, meaning they prefer to travel areas where the habitat changes from one type to the next. Like this. This is a buck, and he's traveling along the edge of a soybean field and a forest. I believe deer like traveling edges, especially during those daylight hours, because they know that if they sense danger, they can disappear back into that cover in a moment's notice. So use that knowledge to your advantage. If you find an area that has all the things we've talked about, food, cover, rubs, scrapes, your best setups, your best stand locations are likely going to be on the edges of different habitat types, because those are the places that deer like to travel. Now let's bring this all together. So here we have what I think is a very typical Pennsylvania piece of land. We have areas for farming and we have a mixture of hardwoods. This kind of landscape is similar to what you'll see across much of the state. And it is great for deer. This kind of mixed habitat is perfect for deer. It's why our deer population is so well and deer are able to thrive here. But it can be tricky to figure out how you would hunt this property. So say you have the chance to hunt this property this fall and you need to figure out where to set up a stand. For me personally, I've found that the best way to do that is through the process of elimination. So the first thing I look for are areas where I think it's unlikely that a deer will be there, and I start for those areas. The first place I'm going to eliminate is that northern edge of the property. There's very little up there as far as food or cover, and it's just unlikely that I'm going to find deer there during the daylight hours. That's not to say that deer won't move through there, especially late at night under the cover of darkness, but that doesn't help me as a bow hunter. So I'm going to begin breaking down this property by not spending much or any time at all really in those areas, at least initially, right off the bat. And then I'm going to look past or eliminate the bottom portion of the property as well. Now this picture was obviously taken in late fall, and you can see that the leaves, or that the trees in this area have lost their leaves. That can be enough to cause deer to be wary of those areas during daylight hours, because they don't offer the same amount of cover where that deer feel safe in. I've found that once the leaves are gone from an area, deer will act differently moving through there. They're going to be more alert, or they just might avoid those areas altogether during the daylight hours. But there are several parts of this property that have caught my attention, and I'm going to begin looking into potential areas to hunt. First, we have a cornfield. This is great for deer because it's got both food and cover. It is not at all uncommon for deer to head into a cornfield to eat and then spend the rest of the day bedded down in that corn. We also have some trees that still have their leaves. I'm going to check these areas to see if there are mass crops on the ground. Are those oak trees? Are they dropping acorns? And I'm going to be looking for rubs and scrapes, like we talked about, anything that would indicate that deer have been there recently. And if I find those things and I feel confident that deer are in those areas, I'm going to look for spots along the edges where the woods and the fields meet. I'm going to look for potential stand locations along those edges. So that way I could potentially get a deer as he's traveling back and forth, going from cover to food or from food to cover, knowing that they'd like to travel those edges. That's where I'm going to start my my analysis, and that's where I'm going to start looking for places to hunt. And then lastly, I wish that was all there was to it. I wish once we found a spot that has food and cover and there's rubs and scrapes, it's that simple then. You just set up a stand and you're bound to shoot a deer. But unfortunately, it is not, because the one variable that always has to be taken into consideration is wind direction. And what that means to you as a hunter is what way, in what direction is the wind taking your scent? This is critically important because deer survive based upon what their noses tell them. A deer will question what it sees, what it hears, but if it catches the scent of a human, it's not usually going to wait around for confirmation that you are there. It's going to avoid the area until you're gone, or worse yet, avoid the area altogether just because you were there. So again, using our typical Pennsylvania property, I talked about wanting to hunt those edges that border the cover and the agricultural areas where the woods and the fields meet. But I also am going to be very cognizant of what the wind is doing. If the wind is coming from the west, then the best stand locations on this property are really going to be unhuntable, because the deer in the area are going to know that I'm around. They'll catch my scent ahead of time. They're not going to come that way. And honestly, having hunted deer for several decades now, I would expect the areas with the best deer sign are also going to be the same areas where the wind is typically going to presenting a huge problem for me, and that it's going to be sending my scent out ahead of me and towards those deer. So don't be discouraged if you find that in the areas that you want to hunt, that the wind is usually working against you. The reason is that is not a coincidence. It's because deer look for those areas. They want to spend the majority of their time in areas where the wind is going to be in their favor. It's essentially their way of deciding to live in a home that has a security system installed. That is what the wind is for deer. It's how they survive year to year. So again, recognize that some of the best areas, the areas that you're going to want to hunt, chances are the wind might be working against you most of the time. So what can you do about it? Well, the answer is be patient. There's not much you can do other than wait for times when the wind is still or the wind has changed its primary direction. So monitor the weather. Throughout the fall, wind direction is going to change not only daily, but it's going to change several times throughout the day itself. So I would wait, again, looking at this property, I would wait for, say, a north wind, when that was blowing my scent away from those areas where I want to hunt. That kind of wind opens up some areas that probably I wouldn't hunt from if it was a west wind. Without exception, the best archery hunters that I know are individuals who absolutely obsess about wind direction. They are always taking it in consideration whenever they go into the woods. And if the wind's not in their favor, they're going to back out of an area, hunt somewhere else, versus going in and announcing to deer that they are there. So keep that in mind. The best spots in the world as far as an area with food, cover, and buck rubs and scrapes can still lead to some unsuccessful hunts if the wind is working against you, if the wind is announcing your presence and ruining any chance of deer coming by. Now, say you've done everything right up until this point. You found a great place to set up and hunt, and you see a deer approaching. The decisions that you make in the next couple of moments are probably the hardest part about bow hunting. They're going to determine if you make a quick and humane kill, or miss the shot, or worse yet, hit the deer but don't recover it. As a general rule to remember, a shot should only be taken if there's a high probability that the arrow will pass through the heart and the lungs, often referred to as the deer's vital organs, which are located in the center of the deer's chest. The goal for a bow hunter is to have that arrow pass through that part of the deer. And the reason I say pass through is because we want the arrow to leave two distinct holes, an entrance hole and an exit hole. If that happens, it causes the blood to flow from both sides. The deer will quickly expire, and the blood trail that it left behind will lead us to it. The second reason that we want to aim at the center of the chest is that it gives us a reasonable margin of error. The heart and the lungs of a deer are roughly the size of a volleyball. So aiming at that spot will still allow us to kill a deer even if our shot is off an inch or two in either direction. Now, when determining whether a potential shot will pass through the center of a deer's chest and hit those vital organs, it comes down to analyzing what type of shot angle the deer is presenting us with at that moment. There are really only two shot angles that meet the criteria of what we need to have the best odds of quickly killing and locating an animal. First is broadside. The point of aim on a broadside shot angle is just behind the front leg and about 1/3 of the way up the body. An arrow that hits a deer at that location will pass through the center of the deer's chest cavity, hitting either the heart or lungs or both, resulting in a quick kill and a recovery of that animal. So once again, the point of aim on a broadside shot angle is about 1/3 of the way up, right behind the front leg. The second best shot angle is quartering away. And we're going to keep the same location in mind when determining where to aim. It's going to be behind that front leg, about 1/3 of the way up the body. And if you visualize this shot scenario at this angle, you can see it's clearly possible for an arrow to travel through the center of this deer's chest, thus hitting the vitals and resulting in a quick kill. Then we have what we call a quartering towards angle. In this scenario, the shoulder blade covers most of the heart and lungs and makes it unlikely that an arrow could pass through the center of the deer's chest, because the chest and those vital areas are covered up by that thick shoulder bone, and that shoulder bone is going to stop an arrow from penetrating. So a quartering towards shot is not a high percentage shot, and it should not be taken by a bow hunter. The same with a straight on shot angle. It's unlikely that an arrow would penetrate all the way through a deer if it was taken in this situation. Instead, even a perfectly shot arrow will hit this deer in the center of its chest, but then stay embedded in the deer. The deer would likely run off and probably die, but it won't leave much of a blood trail behind for us to follow. And thus, there's a very small chance of recovering a deer that is shot under this type of shot angle. And this shot angle here is something that an archer should never attempt. There's no chance of an arrow hitting the vitals in this scenario. There's no way an arrow is going to pass through the center of a deer's chest. Hitting a deer that presents this kind of angle would do nothing more than wound that deer, and it should never be attempted. And sometimes, I think all too often really, the shot angle might be perfect, but there's going to be obstructions in the way. Anytime the chest is covered by an obstruction, the best option is to wait for the deer to clear that obstruction and present an open shot. Likewise with this shot scenario, the heart and the lungs are mainly covered. And it's tempting in these situations to think about trying to thread a needle, so to speak, and place a perfectly shot arrow through all that brush. But what would likely happen is the arrow would deflect off those branches and hit the deer somewhere other than where you're aiming. These are the type of situations where you have to remember to give yourself some margin of error. And this situation doesn't do that. It requires a level of perfection that isn't a reasonable expectation in hunting situations. So for these reasons, this type of shot should also not be taken by an archer. And then lastly, I included this picture because it has so many reasons why you wouldn't try a shot. The first is the deer is quartering towards. So the angle is wrong. The shoulder is the main part that's exposed here. And then we have an obstruction in the way that is blocking what's left of the heart and the back of the lungs. And then lastly, we don't know what is over the hill. So if we tried a shot from this angle and missed, there is no way of knowing where that arrow is going to land and what it might hit, including potentially another hunter who could be over the hill. So this type of shot should never be attempted. Now that we've discussed shot angles, the next factor that comes into play when determining whether to take a shot is what is the distance between you and that deer. The first thing that comes into play when you're analyzing how far is too far to take a shot is you have to keep in mind that accuracy matters. The distance that you're capable of consistently making good shots on a target is the baseline that needs to be determined when deciding how far is too far to shoot. So using this target as an example, if the yellow represents the heart and lungs of a deer, then I would want all my shots to be within those inner circles of the yellow on a consistent basis. And I'm going to find out the distance that I can make that happen and start there. So if by the end of the year, I can hit that area consistently when I'm shooting at 30 yards, then 30 yards is going to be my maximum effective range. And I'm only going to take shots that are 30 yards or less. It's very important to know your effective range as a baseline for determining how far you can shoot when hunting. And that's going to be different for all of us. But the longer that you shoot, the more time you spend with your bow, the more familiar you become with it, the further your effective range is going to become. And with today's modern bows, it's possible after some practice to consistently hit targets at pretty far distances, 50, 60, even 70 yards. But that doesn't mean that it's possible to kill a deer at those distances. Remember, your accuracy just gives you your maximum effective range for accuracy is just a baseline. It doesn't mean that you can kill a deer at those far distances. And the biggest reason why is because deer have incredible hearing and an amazing ability to hear a shot being fired and then quickly move out of the way of that arrow. It's important to remember that the further away the deer is from you, the more opportunity there is for the deer to hear that shot and move, and then the greater the likelihood of not hitting the deer in those vital areas. So this sequence of pictures demonstrates this point. In the first picture on the left, you can see the arrow flying toward the X spot on the deer. And this is an unobstructed broadside shot at a stationary deer. This would be the perfect shot situation. But in the second picture, the deer has either seen the arrow or more likely it heard the shot, and it's now instinctively dropping down and preparing to run. And then in the third picture, you can see the arrow flying over the deer's back, and it looks like it might shave a few hairs off the back and then land harmlessly in the field. All of this took place in a matter of microseconds. You had what looked to be a short kill result in a miss. But that's how fast deer can react. So even if you have the newest, most expensive, fastest bow on the market today, you have to keep in mind that a deer's ability to hear the sound of the bow being fired and then try to move out of the way of that arrow as it comes is still going to be faster than that bow is. And again, the longer that the arrow is in flight, the more time a deer has to move and the more likely it is that these type of situations will play out. So for this reason, based on all the work that's been done, all the data that's been collected about how deer react, what their reaction time is, how quickly they can see and pick up objects moving toward them and hear something in the woods, as well as based on our own experience as hunters and decades spent in the woods, we really recommend that you set a maximum yardage of 35 to 40 yards maximum and limit yourself to those shots. And that's again, if you are, first of all, have the accuracy to hit at that kind of distance. Now, this is such an important topic that we have a video on shot distance that covers it more in depth, and we'll provide a link to that as well. Now, I know we've covered a lot of subjects up until this point, so I'd like to end with some final thoughts, some final tips to keep in mind that hopefully can help you be successful. And I think with archery hunting, it can really be boiled down to three main points: practice, pattern, and patience. So let's talk about them. Practice. This one can't be stressed too much. Spend time before the season getting familiar with your bow and become comfortable shooting it. At first, you need to sight in your bow, see where it's shooting, and make adjustments. And this should be done at a range that gives you the best chance to know exactly where your bow is hitting. But once you've done that and your bow is sighted in, spend time practicing in different environments and in different conditions to prepare yourself for the hunt. Put yourself in situations where it's more challenging to hit the target than it was at the range. You can also practice on full-size 3D animal targets. These are a great way to help you visualize where to aim and how to prepare for hunting situations. If you plan on hunting from a tree stand and you have the chance to practice from an elevated platform before the season begins, take it. Try what that's like. See how your bow performs when there's a steep angle. Basically, the point that I want to get across here is practice as much as possible and in as many different situations and environments as possible. The more you can do that, the more comfortable you're going to be and the better prepared you're going to be when a deer appears. And the second key is to pattern. And what I mean by this is that deer tend to be creatures of habit. They largely stick to the same travel areas and the same routines. And if you can study the areas where you'll be hunting and piece together what the deer are doing day in and day out, the things that they do repeatedly, such as moving along a specific trail every evening in order to get to a cornfield, you can figure out their pattern and you can figure out the spots where you need to be to intercept them. And rubs are a great clue for patterning deer. Rubs don't just tell you that there are deer in the area like we talked about, but they can even tell you what the direction is the deer are traveling based on the side of the tree that the rub is on. And then finally, patience. This is a central component of archery hunting. Your goal should be to want to become part of the woods, not rushed, not feeling anxious, but just relaxed, watching the woods in their normal state. Don't expect to get a shot every time out, or even to see a deer every time out. It just doesn't work that way in archery season. And if you accept that and treat each time out as a learning experience and a chance to learn more about wildlife and learn more about the areas that you're hunting, then you won't mind those slow days. You'll come to understand that they're part of the process. And when success does come, it's going to be even more rewarding. So that concludes my presentation for tonight. I thank you for joining us. I hope you found this to be beneficial. And at this time, we have a few more minutes and we would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, everyone, I'm gonna get the screen switched back around here, and then we will get started with questions. Okay. Um, So before we start answering questions, I did just want to note to everybody that Pennsylvania's 2022 statewide archery season will open on October 1st. Just in case you don't have that date down, go ahead and mark your calendars. All right, so um, the first question that we have is here we go. Okay. So the first question that I have is, do you transport your ladder stand to state game lands and leave it for season or take it out each day?
Okay, Courtney, I'll take a stab at answering that. For me, if I'm going to be hunting out of a ladder stand, which I will be setting one up, I'm going to take that in as soon as the regulation allows us to do so, which for those of us hunting the statewide archery season begins on October 1st. So the earliest I can take that in is Saturday, the 17th of September. And I will put it in a spot, an area that I've known from hunting it the past couple of years that deer tend to travel through pretty consistently. And my goal is going to be to leave it in that spot for most, if not all, of archery season. I don't like to move a ladder stand too much just because of the time that it takes to do so, the amount of individuals that it is required to put it up properly. You know, for my spots, I want them to be as undisturbed as possible throughout the season itself. So once I put that stand up, unless something should drastically change that would want me to move locations, I'm going to keep it there year round just to minimize the amount of disturbance in the woods, minimize the amount of individuals going through there. And that way, if I do set it up ahead of time, that 17th of September, by the time the season starts, the deer will have been accustomed to it. The first couple of days that it's there, it's something new. They're going to be noticing it. But by the time the season comes around, they'll be accustomed to it. And that would be something that I'd go through anytime I'd move it to a new location. I'd have to deal with the fact that, you know, for a deer that goes through there, it might stand out. So hunting from a ladder stand, I'm going to leave it up there throughout the season. And if I do need to move around, then I'll use either a ground blind or a climbing stand to do that.
Okay, thank you so much. Another question that we had that I'm going to also direct towards you, Steve, is can I shoot a deer that is moving?
Okay, great question. And I certainly don't recommend that an archer take a shot at a moving deer for a couple of reasons. First, there's a delay, inevitable delay between when your brain tells you to take the shot and between when you actually do release the arrow. And that delay in time might just be enough for a shot that was aimed at the vitals of a deer to actually hit the deer in the stomach area. So that delay in time can be the difference between a quick kill versus a deer that is wounded and runs off. And again, that's automatic. There is absolutely a delay. As much as we think there isn't, there really is. And the further away that deer is, the longer that delay takes place. There's just so much that can go wrong when a deer is moving. Second reason why we don't recommend taking a shot at a moving deer, just as a general rule of thumb, it's not recommended in the woods under a hunting situation to take any type of shot that you haven't practiced and prepared for before the season began. So certainly, even though I'll shoot throughout the year, just trying to prepare for moving shots in archery season isn't something that's practical. There's no way that I'm aware of to prepare to take a moving shot. So given that it's not something I can prepare for before the season begins, once the season starts, it's not something that I would attempt in the woods. For this reason, what most bow hunters do when a deer is moving is they'll make a noise with their mouth to try to get the deer to stop, and it can just be just a simple, like a grunt-like noise, just something to get that deer's attention. And 9 times out of 10, that deer is going to slam on the brakes if he hears a noise. So what a lot of probably the best practice to do for a bow hunter, be prepared, come back to full draw if you're shooting a compound, or get ready if you're shooting a crossbow, get it the deer in the scope. And then once a deer hits an open area, make that noise with your mouth, get the deer to stop, and then take the shot. That's the preferred way to handle a deer that's moving through the woods.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so I would just like to clarify as well here. We did get a question, a follow-up question. When I noted that the statewide archery season opens on October 1st, that is like archery season is open across the entire state. So that's what I mean when I say statewide. But we had a great question from Thomas. He noted, doesn't the archery season start on September 17th? So if you are within the wildlife management units 2B, 5C, or 5D, it does open on September 17th, but that's only in those specific WMUs across the state. So thank you for proposing that question. And allowing me the chance to clarify that. So you can only hunt archery season starting on September 17th in those specific WMUs. If you're not in or hunting in one of those WMUs, you got to wait for the statewide opener on October 1st. Okay, so we got a ton of questions here. Steve, we did get a question. Would you mind revisiting the wind, talking about how wind interferes when you're hunting?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I know we had an individual or two who said they lost audio for that section. Really studying the winds and how wind impacts deer behavior is something that there's so much to learn in that subject itself. It's something that even the most experienced hunters are still learning. It's a difficult subject to cover it all, but I'll certainly go over the basics again. The most important thing to remember is that a deer survives, a deer lives based on what its nose is telling it. A deer, again, might see something, might hear something and be unsure about it, but if it smells humans, if it smells danger, a deer is going to be on high alert and not come into that area. So before you approach an area, before you think about, let's say you're going to be hunting in the evening, and you might have the best spot in the world picked out, an area where you've seen deer traveling all summer, all fall, you know they're going to be in there. It's vital that you check the wind as well, because if you get into a location and the wind is blowing down and taking your scent, your body odor into that area where you think the deer might be coming from, that is going to be enough to ruin that spot. And what I was trying to show with those slides, picture those arrows coming across, that's the wind moving across the landscape. And in the fall, the vast majority of the time in the fall, we are going to have wind. There's going to be some degree of wind that's going to be interfering with our hunt potentially. So before you go to an area, before you think about setting up at night, check that wind direction. And that's something that you can find any website that has a forecast. There's apps on wind direction specifically for hunters to show where the wind's moving. Just keep that in mind. And if you, again, might have what you think is the best location picked out, but that if that wind is moving down and taking your scent and blowing it to where the deer might be coming from, they're going to know you're there. And there's, in addition to some of those websites or an app to check the wind direction, you can even just check it by seeing what's happening around you. I know hunters who will take up with them into a stand some leaves or some blades of grass or some parts of weeds that they picked up there, and then drop them down from their stand and watch which direction that whatever materials they brought with them, watch what direction they go, because that's going to be the direction that their scent is going. So realize that a deer is almost always going to want to walk with that wind blowing into its nose, blowing into its nostrils. That deer is going to want to come from a direction where it can sense what's out in front of it.
And if you haven't taken that into consideration, and if you've placed a stand, and if you're hunting in a spot on a day when the deer can catch your scent before they even see you, a lot of times you're not even going to know they're there. They're going to turn and they're going to leave that area, and they're going to wait until the wind changes and tells them that everything's safe before they come back into it. So it's really something that I can't stress enough. Learn from experience that the best thing you can do as a hunter is take into consideration what direction is the wind. Is it blowing my scent into that area ahead of time? Because if it is, it's really going to be working against you and decrease your chances of being successful.
Okay, thank you. So we got another question. Um, How do I easily know which areas are permitted for deer hunting? So I can kind of jump in on this one a little bit. So in Pennsylvania, at least from the Pennsylvania Game Commission, we have a little over 1.5 million acres of state game lands that is open and available for hunting season or for hunting and trapping. And then in addition to that, we also have areas, some state parks will allow you to hunt and are open to the public to hunt. And then also they have state forest areas that are open to the public for hunting. So collectively, we easily have um, over 2 million acres of land that's available for hunting. So that is public areas. We do have a interactive map on our website that you can locate the closest state game land to you. And also the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources also has a website that has locations of state forest that you can go hunt on. So we will, in the follow-up email, we'll provide you guys with a link on where you can go to hunt, okay, where you can go to hunt on public lands. In addition to that, we also have a cooperator program where landowners can actually um, offer or open their land for hunting. Okay, and there is information about that as well on our website. So there's some additional areas. Other than that, if you're looking to hunt somewhere on private land, you're going to need to talk to the landowner and get permission to be there. If you're not sure if an area is private or public land, one, you can look for, again, those maps like on our website, check those out and kind of get a area where it is public versus private. You can also, there's like a variety of apps that you can use. OnX is a great one. And we do typically throughout the year have different types of discounts for OnX maps that you can download onto your phone that can help you distinguish what areas are private and what areas are public land. So there's that. But if you are going to hunt on private land, we highly, 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 highly recommend that you talk to the landowner first and get permission to be there. Okay, so the next question. I'm going to direct this question towards Megan. How old do you have to be to take the hunter safety course?
Okay, you have to be 11 years old to take the hunter safety course. Now, that being said, you still have to be 12 years old in order to purchase your hunting license and go hunting with a regular hunting license. You can get the youth mentored license and those kinds of things to take out somebody younger than that. But you have to be 11 years old in order to take it, and you have to take it once you're 12 years old or older.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, that was an easy one.
That was. um, do you recommend using any calls while bow hunting? if anybody wants to take
Yeah,
that.
I don't know if Steve wants to take this one. I personally don't use calls or scent or anything along those lines, but that's a personal preference. So if Steve wants to talk about it, if he does prefer to.
Sure, that is a great question, and like Megan said, it's definitely what works for you personally based on your experience. I've had some pretty good luck with calls, particularly toward the time of the year that we call the rut, which is really the deer mating season. It's when the buck are on the move and they're looking for females that are ready to mate, and they'll be checking out those rubs and those scrapes like we talked about. That time of the year, I found a grunt call can be really effective at bringing in a buck. What that sounds like to a buck, a grunt call sounds like another buck. And as what happens in the animal world during mating season, there's a lot of competition. So, in fact, probably definitely the biggest buck I've shot in an archery season was pretty far away from me, moving away, and I used the grunt call, and he turned on a dime and came right in. He wanted to see who it was that would dare challenge him in his area. So I've had luck with the grunt. Often use what's called a can. I'll mention the manufacturers. Primo's, I believe, makes it. The can that sounds like a female deer. Again, it's just mimicking those sounds that the deer both are making during that mating season. And yeah, I've had pretty good luck with it myself. One thing that I personally haven't had much luck with is rattling, but I know individuals who will swear by that technique as well, and they will try to mimic the sound of two buck fighting and smashing their antlers together, and they've had luck with that. I personally haven't. So it really comes down to what you're comfortable with, what you think works with you, but definitely recommend trying them and seeing if you have any luck with them in your area.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And just kind of as Megan noted before, she started, using calls as a personal preference, and personally for me as well during archery season, I usually do not even carry any calls on me, but that's just a personal preference for season. We got a question. Oh, how do you haul a deer out of the woods if you were fortunate enough to get one? There's a variety of ways of doing this.
Well, I will say I'm fortunate enough to hunt on private land, so I'm able to take a side-by-side out when I go hunting, and that helps me a tremendous amount. Now, when I did used to hunt on public lands, usually I would have to call somebody for help because I'm just physically not always capable of hauling a deer of that size out. Otherwise, I would have a rolling cart that's around, or even a sled sometimes works. Just whatever I have available to help me get it out. Deer are pretty heavy, especially when they're dead weight, and you're trying to drag it out over stumps or possibly logs or whatever is going to be in the woods around you. So I always usually try and make sure I have somebody nearby that I know is going to come out and help me.
This is Courtney B. I also, if I'm hunting public land, I keep a sled, or I also have a little wagon on wheels that fits in the back of my truck. I keep that with me so that, if I am fortunate enough to get a deer down, I can just go back out to my truck, unload that, take it in, and haul it out.
Okay, yeah, so this is the other Courtney. So for me, I typically have a cart that I can take. Although a lot of times I'm just dragging. I'm lucky enough that usually my father and I, if I'm going to go out on state game lands and I plan on going in a bit, usually I have another person with me. So if I am lucky enough to get a deer, then I have somebody to help me drag. So that helps a lot. You can also quarter your deer if you have a long distance to go, and they do have packs that can go on your back. So once you quarter the deer, you can carry it on your pack. there's actually a great video by Randy Newberg on how to quarter your deer in the field. So that is available on YouTube. If you're looking for that, I would highly recommend watching that video. It's also a great video just to learn how to process a deer in general. So yeah, you can quarter it. A lot of people use carts or, use the buddy system, is how I know. Steve, do you have anything to add there?
I'm a big proponent of the buddy system. There's several individuals that we kind of have a running joke throughout the year that, I'm going hunting tomorrow, so be ready. If I get one, I'm going to give you a call. So there's a lot of hard work in getting a deer out of the woods, no doubt about it. So I do think it's beneficial to have somebody potentially on call for bow hunting, not only for getting those deer out of the woods, but also, helping to recover the animal and help you find and locate it. So, to the extent it's possible to have another 2 or 3 individuals that you kind of, are always checking in with each other and letting them know when you're hunting and, bragging that tomorrow's going to be my day, just wait and see. You never know when that comes out to your advantage, and you rely on their help to find and get a deer out of the woods, or you help somebody else do the same.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So we got another question. What are some hunting culture tips? Things that are good to know when interacting with the community as not to upset anyone. Ooh.
Okay, I'll try to get started on this, but certainly everybody else should feel free to weigh in. I think for me, it references something I talked about, that leaving a stand in a spot doesn't reserve the spot to you. You have to remember, especially those of us who hunt public land, that there potentially are going to be other hunters about. And while certainly there's no legal requirement that you be X number of yards away from another hunter, I think just good ethics and good way to practice hunting, especially in archery season, is if an individual's there, if an individual has got to a spot before you arrived, to give them as much room as possible, to just back out of the area as quickly and as quietly as possible, so as not to disturb the deer, and just go find somewhere else to hunt that day. I think one of the benefits of archery is, unlike rifle hunting, where it can be to your advantage to have other hunters close by, because they can stir up the deer, they can keep them moving back and forth. Archery is the opposite of that. And when archery, we want the deer to be as natural as possible. And it's difficult enough when you're hunting by yourself for that to happen. But when you start adding additional people, it becomes more and more unlikely for that to happen. So even if it's an area that I've been, anxious to hunt, if I get there and find somebody beat me to the spot, just a good thing to do, a good rule of thumb is just to, tip the cap to them, let them hunt that area that day, and go find somewhere completely different to hunt.
That is a great point, Steve. I would always recommend that whenever you're going out to have some, especially if you're going on public land, have some backup areas where you would want to go if you walk in and there's a lot of people in the area you had wanted to be in. Have somewhere else in mind that you can go to, so it doesn't completely just mess up your day. You have that backup plan ready to go. So we have another question, and I can take a quick stab at this one. In Wildlife Management Unit 2B, does the 3-up rule mean 3 on one side or 3 on both sides to be legal? Okay, so the 3-up rule, Steve, actually I might need you for this one because I'm not in this area, but I know that the 3-up rule means that you need to have 3 points, and a point is defined as it needs to be an inch. There's like an old saying that if you can hang a ring on the point, it counts, but it actually needs to be 1 inch from the base of the point to the tip, and you need to have 3 on one side and it doesn't count the brow tine. I know that as much.
Yeah, Courtney, that's correct. And I'll admit I am frantically checking the digest right now as we talk, because we are here in the south central part of the state. So and I personally don't hunt the southwestern, so I'm not personally familiar with it. However, it's my understanding that the regulation in that part of the state means that the deer must have 3 points to be a legal buck, and that third point can't be a brow tine. And so for the rest of the state, we need 3 points, and that third point can be a brow tine. So it could be 2 coming off the top, the main beam, and then what's called a brow tine that's usually only 2 to 3 inches from the base. That counts as a legal deer everywhere but those areas in the southwest where it must be 3 points coming off the top. And if there is a brow tine, that can't count as a legal point. I certainly will double check myself here, and will be sure to correct the record if I've misstated that, but that is my understanding of that rule. And I think it's a good reminder for all of us that the digest, the hunting and trapping digest that we get when we buy our license, it really can serve as the Bible, because there are so many regulations when you have a state the size of Pennsylvania with as many hunters as we do. So referencing it at all times just to make sure you're staying on top of the regulation is really a good idea.
Okay, yeah, and I actually just pulled out the digest just to make sure, and looking at the illustration, for the individual who asked this question, the antler restrictions are covered on page 26 of your 2022-23 Hunting and Trapping Digest. So if you're looking for that, that is the page that it is on, and looking at the illustration for the antler restrictions for WMU 2B, it is showing a deer that has 3 points on one antler and then 2 on the other. So I'm assuming it just means one of the sides have to have those 3 points. But we'll get that clarified for you, and make sure we give you the correct answer. Like Steve said, I am out of 5A, so I'm pretty far away from that area, and I haven't ever had to be in the special regulations area. So that's a new question for me. Okay, can you hunt any time of the day, or should it just be in the morning and evening?
So I think morning and evening are typically your best times, but during that rut, that deer mating season, you stand a good chance of being able to get something anytime during the day. During that time, the bucks are chasing throughout the day. But definitely that morning and evening when they're transitioning from bedding to feeding areas is your best time.
Perfect, that was great. Okay, so I do have a question. How early should you be in your tree stand before it's time to hunt?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, the answer is as soon as possible, because as I had mentioned earlier, bow hunting is all about non-disturbance, right? Trying to be as quietly as possible so that the woods can return to normal. So I'm going to give myself a minimum of a half hour if I'm going to hunt in the morning to be in my stand and be completely situated, and then just let everything return to normal. Let all the woods go back to being as they were. Anybody who's bow hunted long enough, I think, and I've certainly been there in that unfortunate situation where something goes wrong in the morning when you're trying to get to your stand in time, and you're going up the tree as it's getting light. And really there's no worse feeling in the world, because as Courtney just alluded to, you're ruining potentially the best time of the day as it's getting light and you're still fumbling around with a tree stand. So I want to get to the woods to make sure early enough to make sure that's not happening. I want to be in my tree have everything with me, made sure I've done everything that I need to do, and give myself a good bit of time, be it up to a half an hour, just to let the woods quiet down and everything go back to normal. Because especially if you're going in early and it's dark, you never know how close a deer might be to you. You know, there could be one that's feeding 100 yards away or so. So to the extent you can minimize any noise you're making and just get up in your tree and let the woods get back to normal, it's going to just increase your chance of being successful.
Hey, this is Megan again. I just want to add on to that, that, you know, as early as you can get into your stand, you want to get into your stand, as Steve mentioned, but just not only because of what the deer are doing, but as we mentioned with like hunting culture and rules of politeness, if you're going into an area and you see another hunter, you're going to want to back out. So if you can be the first hunter out there, you're going to want to be the first hunter out there. So the earlier you can get out there, definitely the better.
Okay. So we got a couple questions that aren't the exact same, but I'm going to try and kind of merge them together and cover it all at once. Um, we have a question about where can somebody practice with their crossbow, and then also where is there anywhere that you can go to practice shooting outside of designated shooting ranges? So I can kind of address the first one there. Well, we do have the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and there is also an interactive map for this as well, that you can find locations of our shooting ranges. On the interactive map, it'll tell you what you can shoot at each shooting range. And we do have locations across the state where you can do archery practice. But I'm not sure if those targets are permitted for crossbows. Steve, do you know? I know that's a slightly different target that's used.
Yeah, you're right. This is something that's certainly evolving for us. It's a big priority for the agency to put in more archery ranges throughout the state. We do have a few that have already been constructed, and they're turning out to be extremely popular. The one that comes to mind for me is in Middle Creek, and I believe, having been there, I think it was about a month ago, that that one crossbow use is permitted. So our ranges, and certainly check our website for one in your area. That's going to be a great location to go and shoot. However, under the Game Commission regulations for using game lands, target practice is permitted, provided that you have a safe backstop. So even if your game lands near you does not have an official range, which is certainly a great feature and a great location if you have one nearby. But even if it doesn't, if you have a mobile archery target, like the block, for instance, that you can take with you, you're permitted to use that location as a way to practice your archery equipment. So so again, check our website, find a game lands nearby, see if there's an archery range. But even if not, there's one in particular I'm thinking of near me where when I lived in college that I would go to and set out my target in the parking lot, because usually in May, June, July, August, not too many individuals were in the parking lot, and there was a nice backstop. So I would take my target and practice several times a week there in the parking lot of the game lands. So that's an option for you as well. So again, check our website, check the digest for locations for ranges as well as game lands near you.
Perfect. And I just want to add on to that. If you do choose to use one of the Game Commission's shooting ranges, note that you either need to purchase a shooting range permit or a valid hunting license. So once you have a hunting license for the current year, you don't need a shooting range permit to use the Game Commission's state game land shooting ranges, but you need to have one or the other. So just be aware of that if you are planning to use one of our shooting ranges. So I'm just looking through here really quickly to make sure I'm not missing any questions. Okay, the only other question that I see here right now is a question about guided hunts or mentored hunts. John asked and notes that last year there was a guided hunt program. I think, is that still available? Maybe not guided, but a mentor hunt maybe. So John, we do have a program that we do out of Philadelphia. It is located at the John Hines National Wildlife Refuge, where the main purpose of the mentor hunt there is to give individuals in the local community who have little to no experience hunting an opportunity to learn how to hunt and to be mentored. So every year, well, I shouldn't say every year, we've been doing it for about 3 years now. We do have a program where we take somebody who's brand new, we teach them how to use crossbow, we teach them about hunting. It's a program very similar to this, and then we offer them the opportunity to be mentored for 3 days to hunt at the John Hines Wildlife Refuge in Philadelphia. It's very limited, and they do give priority to individuals who live in the local area. So that's not quite yet a statewide program. However, I can tell you that we are looking into and for ways that we can provide more mentors to hunters across the state who are interested. So we are working on that, and we're hoping to be able to provide something within the next year. We realize that a lot of people, in order to get out, they really want to learn from somebody and in person and go out with somebody. If you are looking for somebody this year to go out with, I would highly recommend checking out some of the state's NGOs, so non-government organizations such as the National Deer Alliance, the National Wild Turkey Federation, Pheasants Forever, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. All of these organizations have a hunting focus to them, as well as some focus on wildlife conservation. And becoming a member of these organizations and getting to know people and attending meetings is a great way to find somebody who might be interested in taking you out. Another great way is to join your local sportsmen's clubs. There's a lot of people there who are experienced hunters and have been hunting for a long time, who may be available and willing to take somebody out and teach them the ropes. Does anybody else have anything to add to that? I'm not sure of any other locations at the moment for mentors.
No, none come to mind either, Courtney.
Okay, great. Okay, so I think we hit all of the questions. So we're going to go ahead and wrap things up to be respectful of everyone's time. We will follow up within the next week with answers to, well, we just said we got to any questions, but if anything filters in afterwards, we'll make sure to answer those questions. And if you do have questions following up, if there's something you think of afterwards and you would really like an answer to it, we do have an email that you can send us questions to. It is mentoredhunting@pa.gov. So again, that's mentoredhunting@pa.gov. So feel free to send us any questions that you might have afterwards. And yeah, we'll also send you in that follow-up email any additional resources to help you get started hunting. I'd like to thank Steve for sharing his expertise, as well as Megan and Courtney and their time with us tonight. We'd also like to thank all of you for joining us, and we hope you found this program helpful. Please, please, please help us improve these programs by answering a few questions on the follow-up survey. And good luck, have fun, and hunt safely this fall. Good night, everyone.